James Posey is a community leader, advocate, and entrepreneur with a rich history of public service and activism. His life journey from the streets of Indianapolis to the forefront of social justice efforts in Portland, Oregon, showcases his unwavering commitment to improving the lives of marginalized communities. Born in Indianapolis in 1946, Posey's story takes us through the challenges of growing up in a segregated city, his experiences in the military, and his various roles in public service and business.
I'm a kid that was born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1946. And I don't know if anybody know that era, 1946, Eisenhower. You see those movies about the nuclear bomb and kids jumping under the desk way back, back during the time. My first president was Eisenhower. And, it was back during the time when you had these black and white TVs and, black people were migrating from Mississippi, Alabama, up north. They got to Indianapolis. And the story is told that my grandfather, it was a sharecropper, and they were on this sharecropping land in Indianapolis, and he was working hard. Of course, I like the people to tell me the story of my grandfather being the hardest working man in the county or in the state, really, and the reason why white people chose him to do his sharecropping because he could clear fields and land quicker and faster with the least amount of equipment, so on, etc. And so he came to Indianapolis, and he had 14 kids. Some of them were alive, and my dad was the second from the oldest. It was a hard life for me because you could never do anything right. He would call me every name in the book. You ain't worth two dead flies. He wouldn't even give me a soda break during the time. I often think about my grandfather and how he treated us like we were beasts of the field, or his grandkids. And I didn't really appreciate what he was trying to do, but he was trying to position me to be able to look at life from the standpoint it's survival. You have to be tough. You have to be grinding. If you really want to achieve something, then you can. You're going to have to be able to withstand what I'm able to give you as your grandfather. Of course, that boded to be true because as I grew up in Indianapolis, you run across a lot of things. I remember at about 12 or 13 years of age, I went to see my aunt who worked at Methodist Hospital on 16th Street in Indianapolis, and back during that time, there was a cafe right across from the hospital, and I went in there to get me a hamburger, and people in there said, "Well, we don't serve niggers here," and so I made the off-color jokes that, "Well, I don't eat niggers," and people tried to bring me out of the store. I went and told my aunt, "I don't eat niggers, by the way," and with that story with me and my aunt and how Indianapolis was back during that period of time, because those transitional cities, and being from Chicago, I think you understand, between Indianapolis down toward Kentucky and all through those, people from the South mixed, and so you had that real mixture of people that how they felt about black people during that period. So Indianapolis was a very tough city to live in. I always like to tell people that coming up as black in any town in America is rough, but coming up being black in these towns that want to sort of have the mixture of saying they're all for you and they're going to have integration and so forth. It was a tough proposition for black kids. In Indianapolis, we had one purely black high school. It was called Christmas Addicts High School. Most of the black people went to that school. In fact, my wife went to that school. And it was a pretty good school. But I went to George Washington High School, which was over in a part of town called Hallville. And I've always thought that I was going to do well in school. But when I got to Hallville, you got the impression from the teachers that you are Black, because this was a school that was mainly, all the teachers for the most part were Black. Maybe had 1 to 2 Black teachers. But they were always sending you these subliminal messages that you were going to be like your parents. They didn't never want to see you as moving beyond the tracks that you were in. They had 2-tier systems. Most Black people were in the industrial arts and, the craft area. No expectation that you would ever go to college or be too much above what your parents were. My mother was a nurse's aide. My father was a garbage man, a construction worker, worked in the meat packing place. I like to tell the story of I used to go and talk to my father on the lunch hour. They'd be over in the meat packing house killing hogs, hitting them in the head. Then they cut off the meat and put it in a pot and boil it and have the meat for lunch. That was barbaric for me. It scared the hell out of me. I couldn't eat the rest. Watching those hogs get slaughtered. But it was an everyday occurrence for Black people who lived in that period of time. And it talked about how they had to survive and so forth. But it was a step up from all that sharecropping stuff in the South. So we had, it was an industrial period for that time. And my parents were beneficiaries of that. Nevertheless, my father, till his death, could not read or write. He died at 84. He could not read or write. My mother, by contrast, graduated from high school in 1942 in a place called Orlando, Tennessee. So I never really imagined my mother, if you think about it, in 1942, graduated from high school in Tennessee, in rural Tennessee. To me, that was kind of a miracle. And but it explained why, it explained why, in many ways, Black people could not get ahead of the curve, because in many ways they were tied to the legacy of slavery, and most people know that back then they didn't even want us to graduate, and they tried to keep us subservient and all of that. But my mother was for whatever reason was able to graduate from high school, but she's coupled with my dad, who couldn't read or write. Could you understand the dynamics of a person who went to school, was able to graduate from school, tied to a man who couldn't read or write? All I can say is my dad had sweet talk for my mom. I don't know what the deal was on that, but anyway, they were married. They were married until both of them died. They were married for 62 years. But the conflict and the contrast in those two relationships in that family, I was the one experiencing that. And what happened to me is that since I was the oldest, we were always living substandardly. And so the burden of seeing what our family needed rests with me. Always, my brothers and sisters told me, and they already knew this, that I was paying light bills at 14, making sure the gas wasn't cut off. Black people during that time, I don't know if people really understand that. If you've never had your light cut off, or you couldn't get enough money to pay the bills, and you were always living in substandard housing. For example, when we lived on Indiana Avenue, we lived under some people, and we were living under these people. We were all poor. When they flushed their toilet and it overflowed, it would come down into our abode, which was ugly, 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 especially in the wintertime. People don't really get that. And people really don't understand when we were living in those conditions in Indianapolis for that period of time. You were always cold. You were never quite warm. We had those potbelly stoves. People talk about the potbelly stove and taking baths in those round tubs. We were still doing that during my period of time. People don't get that. Taking a bath in a round tub around a potbelly stove, where you had to go out the day before to pick up the coal from the coal plant, which was 2 miles away. I used my little red wagon to tow coal from the coal plant down to our house and put it in our potbelly stove. So those were the times in which I grew up. So most kids during my period of time, which is a sad thing to say, my contemporaries were in the penitentiary or dead. I mean, I'm 78 years old, and it's really a kind of a miracle that I made it through that thing, because when I look back, when I go back to Indianapolis, I can't find anybody during my period of time. I graduated from high school in 1964, and I look, and it's just devastating. And of course, that part of that has to do with the substandard life that Black people lived during that period of time. But drugs were profound. I never will forget. I went to the military, and I come home on leave one time, and I went on the Circle. Everybody from Indianapolis knows where the Circle is. J.C. Penney's was on the Circle. And I was coming home on leave, just kind of shopping and stuff, coming down the Circle, and all of a sudden, my cousin bust out of J.C. Penney's with the police chasing him on the street. He went in there. Of course, he was doing heroin back then, and the police was chasing him. And I tried to stop him, to tell him hello, and he bust past me, and the police was after him. And sad thing about it is not too long after the incident, he went to penitentiary again, and eventually died. Addicted to heroin. Heroin was a big thing way back during those period of time. I think most people don't understand. We've had waves of these drug cycles coming through our community, taking our people out. And so I escaped, honestly. I escaped through the military. I joined the Air Force right after high school. So I was I don't know if people know this, that you have to take a qualification test when you join the military, and you don't necessarily know whether you're going to the Army or the Air Force or the Navy, whatever, but your scores determine whether or not you can get into one of the branches. People don't understand it. So I had a pretty good score. So I went to the Air Force. In contrast, my brother went to the Army. He got shot in the back in Vietnam. I got to be a crew chief. I went to the aircraft maintenance school in Lackland and Amarillo, Texas. I became a crew chief on F-4 Phantom jets, and back then when I started out was F-100. So that's where I went to school. I got my military career most of the time doing that kind of thing. I was in for 8 years, active duty. I was in Vietnam, and I want to tell the story about this is because even when I was in the military, I was always trying to go to school. In fact, I went to the University of Maryland taking correspondence courses while I was in the military. In fact, I was in Vietnam taking University of Maryland correspondence courses to get my degree. And the legacy of who we are and the racism was abound in the military. People don't get that. The example is that I'm taking correspondence courses in the military in Vietnam. My sergeant above me wanted to know why I was doing that. Was I trying to be uppity? He didn't like the idea that I was trying to improve myself, trying to be a person that was going to always be challenging myself to do stuff. So I was taking correspondence courses, wanted to challenge me and chastise me. And those people who were over you then were from the South. They had the same impressions on who we are. Didn't like the idea that we were going to move beyond what they thought we ought to be. What people don't recognize is the military was really one of the only escape mechanisms for ghetto kids, urban kids in the area. And so a lot of the training, discipline, control, you got those kinds of assets and training while you were in there free of charge from the government. Not only that, when I got out, I was able to use that GI Bill, and I was able to get my master's degree based on that GI Bill while I had a family. I've been married for 58 years coming in June, so I've been married to the same woman. She was with me all this time. Both of them was hoodies in Indianapolis, and we kind of just stuck together this whole time. It ain't been easy, by the way. Anybody don't think it's been easy, you can forget about it. But at the end of the day, we were compatible in the sense that we knew where we had been and where we needed to go. So the military, honestly, was a lifesaver for me. It was a springboard for me. I was able to get my education, the GI Bill, the whole idea of having a platform to spring from, especially if you're coming from, situations where you would normally get that. That's why today when I'm start promoting things, I'm saying we need reparations. We need everything we can to make up for the mindset that we bought into about who we are as a people. So the military allowed me to expand my horizons. In fact, that's why I'm here in Portland. When I left the military, I went to several other places, but I got out at McCord and liked this fresh air, like these Northwest-looking people who weren't afraid, and they kind of were more amenable to talking to you. I mean, back in the hood, you were suspicious about everything because you had experienced people trying to take you down for no reason other than the fact that you got black skin. Right? I didn't find that initially when I got out here. It was kind of subliminal, but in between all that, I've done a lot of other things. I worked for Walla Walla State Penitentiary. I was first African-American drug and alcohol treatment counselor for Walla Walla State Penitentiary. I was there shortly after they had that big uprising at Walla Walla State Penitentiary. I think those of you who've been around remember that they had an uprising there, and I went in as one of the recruits to try to settle some of that down. And so I did. I left there. I was executive director of a community center in Yakima for 2 or 3 years, run a recycling center, community center there in Yakima. And I left there and went into the Forest Service, of all places. I worked for the Forest Service for about 4 or 5 years as a human resource HR person. And there's a place called Lakeview. Wasn't no lake down there for real, but it was it was down in almost on the Oregon, California coast, this side of the mountains. And I had as a human resource person, I work with the Indian tribes, and I was trying to sell this Forest Service on diversifying their people. Quiet as a kept, people don't really understand about the Forest Service here locally. It's a carryover from Germany and the Nazis in terms of its foundings and its policies and so forth. It's a white supremacist notion with the Forest Service. That's why they had so few of us in it, and it was aligned with the forestry. And I found this out because I was having some problems matriculating up through the hierarchy, and I had to file a complaint against them when I was in the Forest Service. And I had to do the research to find out the basis of the Forest Service is why its culture was so adverse to black people. That's one of the things I found out in doing the research, that the Forest Service has that Nazi Germany, and you can begin to make the connections about their forests and how they use some of their same policies over there. But I got out of the Forest Service and started my own business in trucking. And I only had to conclude that came back to my granddaddy, who worked me like a slave, and his trucking business. That's the only reason why I can make that connection why I went into trucking. But how hard could it be? How hard could it be to get a load of dirt and carry it across the city and dump it and bring it back? And it would seem like it was a business that could make some money at it. Little did I know that was a system in which the white boys had claimed, and they did not want none of us in that. I went through all kind of hell trying to get a license, trying to trying to just get the credentials to be able to do construction work in Oregon. I got the records on all that. I'll give you an example of that. It's just that even though black truckers were less than 0.5% of the actual population of truckers, they were getting somewhere around 15% of the complaints from the DOT, which folded into why they couldn't get licenses. This was back during the Reagan's period of time. And I can just say that's the only good thing Reagan, I think, did that helped me out was he deregulated the trucking industry. So I was able to get my license as a result of that. Prior to that, I was able to get grandfathered in working with a company called Rock and Roll Construction. He was one of just few black truckers. I work with them, and I'm friends with those guys today. The sad part about it is we still have very few African-American truckers in an industry that is booming and busting, and it's just outrageous that we're still behind the 8 ball in that industry. I used to run a health clinic right over there off of 8th Street. You probably know it was a volunteer health agency. Health Help was the name of it, and I ran that for a couple of years, and it was a part of some of the things that we were doing around African American health. People way back then, when Usini Perkins and them came to town, I don't know if you remember, Usini Perkins was a guy out of Chicago. You look Usini up. He was a profound guy. He brought to me black culture to Portland. It really inspired our community to look at Afrocentric methods of doing stuff. Usini Perkins was a guy who put together the Coalition of Black Men. He also put together a investment club, one of the first black investment clubs here. He also was pretty instrumental in putting together this literary club. And in fact, O.B. Hill and those guys who did Reflection Coffee Shop used his energy to put together Reflections and to do a literary thing here. Very profound guy, and he didn't last long because he had the audacity of going to the City Club and telling them that we have some thugs in 3-piece suits running the city. He didn't last long. Subsequently, I went into business because I worked as a juvenile probation officer prior to all this stuff I'm talking to you all about. But what I found out was that our young people really, in many cases, all they really needed is a chance. And some of the delinquency they was involved in, the system tried to blame them for it. But in fact, the system was at fault for putting them in these predicaments where they couldn't achieve, where they had less than viable parents, less than viable incomes. They put them into a catastrophic situation with very, very little hope for the future. And whether we know it or not as a society, when you drive an agenda that really degrades and make our young people feel like they're less than humans, then that's what they're going to turn out to be. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't invest in these kids and you don't invest in a community, then that's what you're going to get ultimately. So you're getting what you paid for by not investing in the future. Some years earlier, we had a Model Cities program. And Model Cities program had some funds, and I've always been leaning toward business, right? So we wrote a program in which we bought some lawnmowers. We set up a business model for the lawnmower and lawn care business. Several of these young brothers came in and did the marketing, they did the dispatch, they did the door-to-door solicitation for yards and so on and forth. And at the end of the program, the theory was that we were going to give them the lawnmowers and they would use the the blueprint we gave them during this Model Cities program to inspire them to go on and on to do stuff. And the program ended, and just like a lot of government programs, they reneged on giving those lawnmowers up. Pissed me off to no end that we couldn't give those kids those lawnmowers. They wanted to account for the lawnmower. You know how these government programs are. So but as it turns out, that program went away. Subsequently, years later, the kids who were in that program that went into business. The guy who bought the Texas Club down on Williams was one of my lawnmower kids. I don't know if you remember that kid that had the Texas Club for a minute down on Williams Avenue. He was one of them. Well, the story that I put in Facebook about my uncle and the cab situation and the bootleg cab, we called it back then. These were survival mechanisms that black people had to do to survive back in the day. And, they did all kinds of things. In Indianapolis, they had prohibition. You couldn't buy liquor on a Sunday. And they just removed that here in the last couple of years, that you can buy liquor in Indianapolis on a Sunday. And so black people trying to be creative they sold liquor out of their basements. And, in order to do, they did whatever they needed to do in order to compensate for their lack of income, et cetera, and et cetera. My uncles back then, I just want to make it real clear, my uncle eventually was legitimately a cab operator in Indianapolis, Uncle Pito. Prior to that time, though, my father and my uncles all used their personal vehicle to do what we call a modern-day Uber business in their time. And so, in fact, I was telling somebody that the only time I ever saw my father in jail was him doing, illegal bootlegging and putting in jail, which was, I don't know if people know it or not, but when your dad goes to jail, all hell comes down. When you see your dad and he's in jail, he is the stabilizing force in your whole existence, then it's a down pressure on your whole mental state. So you think about these kids whose fathers and parents are in jail, black kids in particular, the mental degradation they go through knowing that their parents are socially everything. So it spreads like a disease. That's only one time my father was in jail, thank goodness, and I was able to withstand that. But the whole piece about my uncle and the whole system is designed to work against us. And in many ways, it's subversive. We don't even know it most of the time, because people will say, talk about the bureaucratic process, will say they're trying to support you when they're really not. And they're trying to figure out all the other ways to keep the status quo. I don't know if people understand this, but America, and it's playing out in today's existence about how we do business. They really are not interested in black people being equal citizens in this country. I know that's a profound statement to say, but I really feel that to my bone. And I went to a meeting yesterday in which the brother was talking about it. Oftentimes, our rhetoric does not match our actions and vice versa. We say the right liberal people in this town want to talk about equity and inclusion, but they're not doing those things that would really bring that about. Those issues with my uncle are precursors to this current day thing that we're experiencing. All the time we're talking about these issues, trying to make progress, and real time things are working against us. This situation with my uncle goes deeper than that, because during the period of time that article was written, there were an influx of immigrants, people from third world countries coming over, taking those positions that typically naturalized black people would have. And if you read that article, you can see there was a real commotion about other people from other nationalities coming in, supplanting, natural black people who were in that town. Because We don't want to say this, but the truth of the matter is that people from anywhere is better positioned to take advantage of our economic situation rather than the natural-born Black people. For whatever reason, don't ask me why, what for, but you can make your own speculations of why that is. But people that come from other countries, whatever color skin they are, the Arabians, the East Indians, anybody except for the Black people who have been here for their whole existence are been subjugated to those kind of things in our community. That's really the story behind that, because eventually my uncle did do his own cab company. Then we had these influx of immigrants that came in and took over there. So there's an iteration of how Black people have been suppressed economically in our community. So that's the story behind that. I started a chapter of the National Association of Minority Contractors here back in the early 90s, 1995, 90s, back during that period of time. And so now the branch or the chapter is doing very well. Every time I go into some entity, you go in with the best of hopes, but you find out that there's discrepancies, disparities in how we're being treated across the board. Legally, every course we endeavor to succeed in, we're cocooned by a whole series of systems, legal procedures, process that really were not designed for us. In fact, many of them are set up so to block us. All these Supreme Court decisions, and now we're, even in the liberal days, we were not doing that well on these Supreme Court decisions, and now we've even gotten worse with this very conservative Supreme Court decisions. But be that as it may, we can't give up. We still have to, use whatever mechanisms we have to fight and develop processes to buck up against those systems. And conversely, however, I'm just saying to you all at this time, and y'all gonna put this on tape and everything, but there's an effort to homogenize Black people, make sure that their focus is on everybody except for Black people. I'm just going to say this, these organizations, I would like to say unbeknownst to them, are really diluting the emphasis on where Black people are. And I'm saying that to say this. If Black people are doing well, all the other groups are doing well. We're the barometer for how other groups are doing. And we're often out here shaking these trees, and every other group, including white women, are picking up the fruit and running with it. And that's why the number still doesn't reflect us moving the needle, especially Black men. In particular, Black men are left out of this agenda for us to do well. And I see this. I don't often have the words to express it or the systems to put in place, but listen, I was one of the first persons who started the Blacks in Government chapter out at the Air Base when I was in the National Guard. We had to have a Blacks in Government because essentially the Air National Guard was a flying club for white men at the Portland Air National Guard till I started the Blacks in Government, so we could at least matriculate. And make no mistake about it, as I said before, these government military programs are pathways for us to build capacity. You have the GI Bill, you get all these housing benefits, you get all these other platform financial bases that we are excluded from because we're not in this game at the same level white people are. These are mathematical predictions that we can paste and predict where we will be based upon our absence from these fields. That's why I do the stuff that I'm doing, based to make sure to some degree we understand that we're being excluded, and we need to, because I have a brother got a bullet in the back in Vietnam who's dead, who fought for these ideals that we deserve to have our place in this society. I'm American through and through. And if there's some privileges and benefits of being American, I damn well better be getting them. My children better be getting them. Your children better be getting them. And I just refuse not to spend my time fighting for those things until they throw some dirt on my face. There is a Black community in Portland, and one of the people sitting next to you who perpetuates that whole notion of a Black community. He's out there. He did a weather report on what we was doing in the Black community, and I'm sorry he ain't doing this what he used to be doing, but he used to report about who shot John down the street, what's going on, what's happening, and we could actually relate to what he was talking about, because these are personal. What I like about Portland is it's small enough that you can know people by their name, by who they are, who their family members are. Don't talk about too many people, because you're going to eventually get back to them, because you'll be talking about. That's what the real value of being in Portland. You can get on there and talk to Ken Berry and, Kevin Berry and those guys, and you can see where they plugged in, where they've tried to do some things. The thing about the Black community in Portland, there's a thing, there's a book called A Peculiar Paradise. I would advise anybody to look at that book, because it tells the story of how we're in a paradise for Black people in theory, but in reality it's not, because we get to thinking we done died and gone to heaven coming here, because white people seem to overtly treat us nicely. We don't seem to have as many barriers as we would in Indianapolis, Chicago. But in fact, it's not too much different when you pull back the covers and you look who's doing what, and when you really try to measure the needle of whether or not we've made progress, we haven't. We haven't made that. Our housing situation, we still have the lowest home ownership. Our health disparities are still the lowest in any other group here. We have the least amount of access to capital. They're still redlining us. The whole gentrification thing was all about displacing Black people. Even the organizations that are purported to help us can't seem to maintain staff. We just lost the civil rights director for the Department of Transportation. Here's the piece that's really disturbing, is that when Black people come here and want to be here, oftentimes they can't get a grip. They can't assimilate into the Black culture here, because they don't feel like they belong. I've been here for 45, 50 years. Some people say, since I wasn't raised here, I'm not a Portlander. I beg to differ, But the reality is, trying to become a person who is vested in this community is not it's not an easy thing for people who want to really call Portland their home. So that's the piece. Then you look and you see what's going on. Like right now, we're getting to do a restructuring of the government. And we had some Black people who were all fighting for this restructuring of the government. But from my perspective, they actually are diluting the Black influence on this power structure by having 12 new city councilors as opposed to having 4. People might want to question that, but when you look at how the city is divided up and who will have power in this city, I don't see how having 12 versus 4 is going to actually give more inclusion for Black people. There are people who are looking at that. So we have to do a better job of understanding what our political power is in this community, and we're not doing a very good job of doing that. Some people think it's all over. Black people are not interested. Black people are not well informed well enough to know what's in their best interest. So we want to defer everything to white people to tell us what we need and how we get it. That brings me up to the reason why I ran for mayor. I ran for mayor in 2004 because this white man wanted to come in and said he was going to speak for us. I said, hell no. Hell no. I had no political experience. But at some point we have to stand up to have our own dignity as Black people regardless of what the odds are against us. It's always been against us. We cannot afford to lay down and let white people just speak for us carte blanche. We have to make a decision to grab what we have as Black people and understand we have power if we want to use it, if we come together, if we begin to work hard at, I'm going to say this, minimizing the bullshit and get real. I'm talking about really get real. Work as hard on trying to prosper our community as they work on trying to deny us prosperity. At least that hard. And then if we do that, we would be in a better shape. I ran for mayor, and I don't regret any of it, but I was running for mayor. I had my 2 businesses. I had a deli. I had a construction company. I had employees. I was the president of this NAMAC organization. I was trying to do this nonprofit. I was doing all of that, thinking I could run for mayor. That was stupid, because running for political office is a vocation. Don't try to do that thinking you can do everything else. You have to treat that as if it's the only thing in your life you want to do, and if you want to win, that's what it takes. It takes a total commitment to trying to be a political, opponent or whatever it is that you're doing, and and the knowledge base in doing that is cumulative. In other words, you don't get there by hitting it once. Now, maybe if I would have ran again, my chances would have increased for other stuff, because it's a process. You develop skills like you do anything else in a political process. Our people don't get that. They think they can go in there and get a job. Some of them are running because they need a job. That's the wrong place to start, just to get a job. And so I ran, and I don't regret it. And the other piece about it is, I don't want to take credit necessarily for it, but other people saw that they could do it too. They try to intimidate you by your inability to speak, but God gives you the ability to do things if you're doing it for the right reason. He gives you the courage. He would imbue you with skills that you didn't even think you had if you were trying to do it and you're doing it in order for a positive thing, for a positive reason. I had been working with the NAACP off and on for the last 20 years. And it's a brand that is internationally known, and it's done a lot of positive things. In the absence of NAACP, we would be worse off. That's the calculation that I know nationally. However, locally, we've had gobs of problems. For whatever reason, folks see the NAACP as a vehicle. They can embellish their resume. It defers to all these preachers who need another pulpit they can get behind and talk to people. They have various and sundry reasons for wanting to be involved with the NAACP, except for the reason they ought to, as far as I'm concerned, and that is to improve our community. And so we went through a series of those. You go back and look at the leadership of the NAACP, you'll see that some of these leaders are, in fact, there's a couple, at least one of them that's in jail right now. I ain't going to tell you who it is, but it's one of them's in the penitentiary. The other one, the one that I was working with, in fact, I'm responsible for bringing him into the NAACP. There was a very public article about him being a pedophile. NAACP is a membership-driven organization. And what I mean by that is ain't nobody getting paid. That's shocking to me. No one's getting paid. How do you expect for anything to get done if you don't have professional staff to do it? And it's a blessing and it's a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that can't nobody buy you, ain't nobody trying to influence you by your dollars or whatever. But on the other hand, I struggle to get an email out. As a president, I'm taking out the trash. I'm picking up the mail. And that shouldn't be the case. And there's ways to do around it. But one of the other big reasons is that I saw the NAACP locally being taken over by atheists, agnostics, people that have no respect for God, when in fact that's what the whole basis of the NAACP came into existence, based upon that premise. So they had went away from their moorings and how and so forth, what they were supposed to be doing. And I didn't like that. The other thing is that they were leaning toward, I thought, just obsessive, radical approaches to stuff. For example, they wouldn't even talk to the police. Now, I understand you didn't want black people to get killed by the police, and I ain't for that, and I'll be bucking up that against that in any way I possibly can, holding the police accountable. But how do you resolve anything if you're not even want to have conversations with the people that are doing that? So they went counter to anything that really represent any reasonable approach to getting any business done for the benefit of our people. You understand what I mean? And some of the best people we have in this community are black police officers. I really do believe that. I mean, they ain't been perfect by any means, but I could mention the names, but we know them, and so. How do you besmirch a whole class of people because of one or two stupid people doing stupid stuff, and you still have the option of holding everybody accountable for a better community? We're not better off because we have a weak police force or a weak, ineffective police force. So I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be trying to shoot the current mayor because he's an imperfect being. I don't believe intrinsically he wants to do bad. I just think he don't have the best ability of process. You can't think the worst of people just because you have a difference. They have a difference in approach. You got to be trying to figure out ways to work together with people and bring people together as opposed to alienating folk. That's not going to be my motto. I think the NAACP is a vehicle and has a vision to actually bring people together and use as an instrument to make things better as opposed to making things worse. That's one of the reasons why I ran. I wanted to see us really use this brand to bring people together, hold people accountable, for God's sake, hold people accountable, but at the same time, make it a positive force in our community as opposed to a negative force. We're not put here by accident. And if you're living your life in honor of God, everything in nature submits to God except for human beings. And when we submit to God, everything's going to work out for the best. I'm not trying to be no preacher or nothing like that, but I'm just thinking everything I've done in my life is based upon do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's some 10 principles that I think guides the whole universe, and they've never failed me. I would like people to remember me for doing the best I could, for the best reasons I could, in the best way I could.
Thanks for tuning in to Oregon Hidden Legacy. For more information about this podcast, go to OregonHiddenLegacy.org.